Just waiting while we get this live video started. Hopefully there won't be too much noise in the background. Seemed like a perfect day to do this outside, but there's also construction in my neighborhood, so you may hear some hammering and who knows what in the background. I know last time when I was outside, it seemed like the birds were intent on being as loud as possible, which I loved. I didn't actually realize it was so loud until I actually started watching the video after the fact. So really appreciate folks joining in today. I'm Aliki Moncrief. I'm the Executive Director of Florida Conservation Voters. And we'll just get started a little slowly here while folks join on. Again, apologies for any background noise. Amazingly, there's still construction going on in my neighborhood, which is just kind of incredible. Over the course of a few months, they turned an empty, actually it wasn't an empty lot, they took down some older homes, made it an empty lot, and now are putting 6 townhousey style homes up. It's kind of incredible to see how quickly they've sprouted up. But anyway, so apologies for any background noise here. Hopefully it's not too bad. Wanted to chat with folks about a few different things this week. We are talking about energy in general. Some of this is going to be a recap from last week, some big developments on the national front when it comes to energy policy. But then I want to delve into some state-specific issues that I think might be interesting to people, especially as we start to adapt energy policy in this world of the coronavirus. So you may remember from last week that the Trump administration announced some pretty major rollbacks to enforcement of our environmental rules. While, we're all 100% focused on keeping our families safe, while people are worried about getting their Paycheck Protection Program filings done and making sure that they are still being able to bring some money into the door, put food on the table, the Trump administration essentially granted a huge favor to the oil and gas industry by rolling back some pollution protections. He ordered the Environmental Protection Agency to do that. So in March, this was, it's only April 8th today, isn't it? So this was last week. EPA issued a suspension of its enforcement of environmental laws, telling the oil industry it's not going to seek penalties for non-compliance with routine monitoring and reporting obligations. It's obviously a free ticket to polluters, and that routine monitoring and reporting is super important to make sure waters are clean from oil pollution, gas pollution. So far, so many folks took action from last week. We've had over 500 actions taken, letters to Trump saying this is an absolutely wrong move. So we're super excited that people have been engaged. If you haven't already sent your message to Trump, please go ahead and click on the link that Carson's going to provide here in the chat box. I guess it's a chat box, and you can take action there. What's interesting, I started thinking about how this rollback idea, even though it's supercharged right now with COVID, it's something that Trump's been doing throughout his entire administration. There have actually been 95 different environmental rules that he has rolled back, many of which were essential to keeping our air clean, making sure that our water's clean. These are rules that are the underpinnings of really, if you think about it, public health policy. So there's a link. Carson, I don't know if you've got it. We can certainly provide it later. There's a great New York Times article that went through and listed all 95 of Trump's rollbacks. And I think it's really important to remember, partly because of what's happening here in the moment with this most recent EPA rollback, but also because a lot of voters throughout Florida, they kind of have a sense that Trump is not great for the environment, but many of them actually don't know what specifically he has done. I think a lot of voters who maybe aren't as plugged in as conservation voters, they have a feeling that he's not great on the environment, but they think he's just sort of a neutral, that he's not doing great, but he's not doing badly. The reality is he's doing extremely badly. He is rolling back environmental regulations at every step. So we've got to take action and make sure that we're remembering that in November when it comes time to change this administration. We've got to get a fresh start here. So that's, again, thanks to everybody on the EPA rollbacks. I think in addition to that, I wanted to highlight that the rollback we talked about last week with the clean car standards, the Trump administration finalized an assault on the Obama era clean car standards. Those standards would have cut back on carbon emissions from cars. And of course, he's doing this in the midst of a respiratory disease crisis. So really bad timing on the Trump administration's part. One thing that I think is interesting, if folks are interested in taking action, our national partner, the League of Conservation Voters, is calling on car makers to stand up in support of the Obama era clean car standards. And I actually have a list of them, many of the car makers have said that they will stick to those more stringent standards. So those companies include, well, actually, I have who hasn't. Hold on a second here. Let me make sure I read my notes correctly. So the car companies that have said they will not stick to the stronger clean air standards are GM, Toyota, Fiat Chrysler, Nissan, Hyundai, and Subaru, which really makes me ashamed because I have a Subaru, a 20-year-old Subaru, and I've always loved driving it, but now obviously my feelings for Subaru are tarnished here. But if you'd like to take action, Carson's going to drop a link into the chat box. Our national partner LCV is calling on folks to tweet at these auto companies and ask them, actually demand that they stick with the cleaner car standards. Just a little note about who LCV is and how they relate to us. So Florida Conservation Voters, we're a state organization. We focus on what's happening at the state policy level, and increasingly we're working within the local government context. Our national partner, the League of Conservation Voters, they focus their resources, their research, their lobbying, their electoral work on members of Congress, the U.S. Senate, and the presidency. So we partner with LCV on a lot of things. We try to sort of support their work. For example, in the 2018 election, they were trying to prevent the election of Rick Scott to the U.S. Senate. We worked very closely with them to try to prevent that because we had 10 years of experience with him as a terrible environmental governor, and the last thing we wanted to see was him get a promotion to the U.S. Senate. Unfortunately, he won by only about 12,000 votes, so we've got to come back on the next cycle and try to boot him out. So the other thing about LCV is they're the national group. As I mentioned, we are a state-based organization. We actually have 30 conservation voter organizations throughout the country. And over the last 5 years, we've all been working very hard to collaborate more, share resources, share knowledge. In Florida, we often think that we're unique, and we are in a lot of ways. At the same time, there are things that happen here that our partners in other states have experienced, and so we are really appreciative to be able to draw on the experience of other conservation voter groups from around the country. I see a comment in the chat box. Danielle Irwin, Florida DEP rulemaking, right, to assume the Army Corps EPA wetland regulatory program is also going forward despite the fact that there's limited to really no public engagement opportunities right now on that. So what Danielle's referencing here, last year, I believe, so I think it was the 2019, it might have been the 2018 state legislative cycle, the state legislature passed a bill authorizing the state DEP to take wetlands permitting authority onto the DEP shoulders. So what that would do is cut out the Army Corps of Engineers, which is a federal agency, obviously, and the Environmental Protection Agency, cut them out of the process. Problem with that, huge problems with that, is removing an entire safety net from further destroying wetlands in Florida. Back in someone's going to be able to correct me on this, but I want to say it was the 80s, maybe even the 70s. I think it was the 80s. The United States, pursuant to the Clean Water Act, there was a policy recognition that we had to lose no more wetlands, that we needed a no net loss policy. And unfortunately, since that time, Florida's wetlands have been lost by leaps and bounds. Having the Army Corps and the Environmental Protection Agency as another stopgap to paving over these wetlands is a really crucial tool to protecting. And yet the legislature did authorize DEP to move forward with cutting those agencies out. So it's a great flag, Danielle. It's yet another example of some rollbacks that we're experiencing. And right in this moment, lots of people want to speak out against it, but there's no opportunity for them to engage in public forums on that. So let's see, what else do we have here? I wanted to highlight for folks, like while we're on the theme of, we were talking a little bit ago about the request of the oil industry, that's also coming right on the heels of the 10-year anniversary of the BP oil spill, which caused dramatic economic impacts in our state, because of course people from around the country and around the world thought that oil reached our shores, and of course they weren't coming. We are just now, 10 years later, still seeing impacts in terms of dolphin deaths, other wildlife impacts, water quality impacts from the BP oil spill. And so giving a freebie to the oil and gas industry right now is really hurtful, just as we're gearing up to recognize the 10-year anniversary of the BP oil spill. So what's happened in that last 10 years? I was thinking about it earlier, like, well, where was I 10 years ago? My second daughter had just been born. She was only about 4 months old. So she has an entire little kid lifetime that's happened. Sure, a lot of folks could think about, where were you? The BP oil spill was one of those where were you moments, especially for Florida, if not the whole country. It was such a big disaster. Bob, we do have a letter template to send to the EPA. Maybe Carson can plug that back into the chat box. We can definitely, if you want to take a look at that link, you're welcome to take any language from there, any information from there, and make it your own. Absolutely. So back to, got distracted there, apologies. BP oil, Florida state waters are approximately 3 miles off the coast. It's a great thing that we were able to codify this into our Constitution. So from now, forevermore, not just in Florida, but around the country. Hopefully I didn't lose everybody there. This is one of the downsides. It's a total upshot for me to be outside. The downside is potentially losing internet connection. So we'll see. Maybe I need to get closer to the house. Meanwhile, I'm being pummeled by pollen pods from the trees around me. So that's a lot of fun. Fortunately, I'm not allergic. So more on the energy front, wanted to give you all a heads up on something that's going on. You may have been seeing reports of reports in the news about how Governor DeSantis is standing up to make sure that Floridians are protected, making sure that there's a safety net for people who are losing their jobs because of the COVID crisis. There's been a lot around, and I think last week he issued a moratorium on evictions, which was really welcomed. We are actually working to see, how is the governor and how are utilities going to respond to this crisis in terms of making sure that their customers can keep their lights on, to make sure that their electricity is not cut off, to make sure that their water is not cut off. To give you a little bit of an update, it's a little bit of a mixed bag throughout the state right now. Investor-owned utilities on the energy front, this is, of course, investor-owned utilities, Florida Power and Light, Duke, TECO, they power about 75% of the state. FPL alone powers about 50% of the state. The remainder is powered by municipal utilities like what we have here in the city of Tallahassee, Orlando, Jacksonville. There are communities that have municipal owned utilities. And then there are of course, rural cooperatives. So they provide electricity to folks who live in more rural. But these investor owned utilities, they power 75% of the state. I mentioned a few. Florida Power and Light is the largest. Just to give you an example of what are the utilities doing in this time of crisis for their customers, like I said, it's a mixed bag. Florida Power and Light has said that starting May 1st, they're going to do a one-time 25% reduction in a customer's utility bill. Duke Energy has followed suit and said, yep, we'll give you a one-time 25% reduction. That's it. I'm just going to let that sit for a minute because that's, you're talking, what is 25%? $25. If your electricity bill is $100, that means you'll get a $25 credit or reduction on your bill starting in May. Well, when you're talking about people who are losing their jobs, people who are worried about, they don't have a paycheck coming in, a 25% reduction in your utility bill is nice, but I'm not sure that that's enough in terms of creating a safety net, particularly for low-income families around the state. So right now, the Public Service Commission in Florida and the governor is essentially letting these investor-owned utilities say what their response is going to be to this crisis. On the other hand, there are Public Service Commission, they're called different things around the country, Public Utility Commission, ours is the Public Service Commission. Around the country, there are PUCs, PSCs, they're establishing policies that are uniform across their states, apply to everybody, and that are way more protective than what we're seeing coming out of the investor-owned utilities. I think Carson's going to drop a link in here. One of our partners, AEE, Advanced Energy Economy, has put together a great map where you can see what are some of other states doing on this front. Unfortunately, you'll notice that Florida is absent in taking any kind of leadership on this. One of the things that I think is really important for people to think about in terms of investor-owned utilities sort of dictating their own response and their own policy is that they are guaranteed by state law, Florida Power and Light, for example, up to 11.5% profits. So they're guaranteed an 11.5% profit margin, and part of that is because of the agreement that, okay, you utilities, investor-owned utilities, you're going to provide reliable energy. We're going to, in exchange for that, we, the people of Florida, are going to give you a monopoly. You're going to be able to operate in your service territory without any competition whatsoever, and in return, we expect reliable service. So it's sort of, I think now in this moment of crisis, if there was ever a time for utilities to step up and dip into these profits that they have been garnering for years and years and years, if there was ever a time for them to give more than a 25% one-time reduction in customers' utility bills, now is the time. So we're working with a coalition of partners to try to navigate this space. We're hopefully starting, well, hopefully this week. So I'm giving you a little bit of a sneak preview here. But along with many partners throughout the state, we're looking to ask the governor, one, declare a moratorium on utility disconnects until, a month, 2 months after the national state of emergency is lifted. At the minimum, people should not have to be worrying about losing their power at this time. We're also going to be working with partners on the longer term policy of, so who's going to bear the burden of unpaid utility bills? Should it be low-income families throughout Florida, or should it be the utilities? So we'd love to hear from folks here. Obviously, we care about conservation voters, what you all think about this issue. The way I kind of think about it is, the IOUs, it's kind of like insurance. You pay insurance X dollars. You have the security of knowing that when something bad happens, you can sort of tap into that as a resource. Well, Florida Power and Light, Duke Energy, these investor-owned utilities have been getting a guaranteed rate of return of 11.5%. In fact, Florida Power and Light October of last year, so October of 2019, they went to the Public Service Commission and asked for that profit margin to be upped to 12.5%. So they've got this guaranteed rate of return. I think now's the time that they need that happens. So would love to hear more about what you all think about this. We obviously will absolutely keep you in the loop on calling on the governor to issue a moratorium on disconnects and to do more to create a safety net for families in Florida and make sure that we don't come out on the other end of this crisis with hundreds, if not thousands of dollars in unpaid bills that are further going to burden low-income families in Florida. So I'll pause, see if anybody has any questions. Carson let's do a little scrolling here, see if I missed anything. Looks like we addressed everything. Great. Well, hopefully this has been a few minutes of your time that you're glad you're glad you gave. You know, you have these moments where you're like, gosh, that's 5 minutes I won't get back. Hopefully that's not your sentiment right now. We look forward to more of these Facebook Live video interactions with everybody. Thursday coming up, Lindsay Cross, our Government Relations Director, is going to be doing one, so definitely tune in for that. And we look forward to seeing you all here in the future. Thanks so much.